just talk about who you are. The quick stuff. I was born such something that your kids might want, grandkids or friends might want to see one day. Just who are you?
Well, I'm James Wilson. I am originally from Nashville, Tennessee. I went to Tennessee Tech, played baseball there. Had far more interest in baseball than education at the time. But at age 21, I needed a job. Cobb School District was recruiting at Tennessee Tech. A man by the name of Larry Hines interviewed me. It was a 2 o'clock interview. And I had baseball practice at 3. So the interview was going pretty well. But I finally said, can we speed this up? I've got to go. And so we sped it up, and I figured I would never hear from him again. But he pretty much hired me the very next day. So we came to Marietta, Georgia to begin our education career, and basically have been here ever since.
What schools have you worked in? What's been your path within the education system?
Yeah, in the 30 years that I spent in Cobb County, I started out as a classroom teacher at Floyd Middle School in 1975, and enjoyed that immensely. Just met so many good people, so many good educators. I realized I was at the right place because I was learning so much. I stayed there for a few years, and then actually became a community school director for a few years, and then came to Lassiter High School, where we are today as an assistant principal. And that was an unusual time because the school was growing so fast. I looked more like 18 years old than 28 years old. And so I was pretty nervous dealing with students that looked in some cases older than me. But it was a great experience. Then became principal at Daniel Middle School. And then the administration sent me back to Lassiter a few years later to be the principal. And great years they were. Lassiter is a great school, just like all schools in Cobb County, but certainly my time at Lassiter really put me on a path to learn a great deal, to have great opportunities, and work for a great school system. And then after 4 years at Lassiter, I was called by the superintendent, and she wanted me to come in to be over the high schools. And quite honestly, I wasn't excited about that because Lassiter was a great school, and now I was over 14 schools. And so I wasn't too excited about that, but I did it. Administration changed, and they asked me to be the assistant superintendent of personnel. I liked that. I liked that a lot. Didn't stay there but 8 months. We had a new superintendent, and he decided he needed a deputy, and so he made me the deputy school superintendent.
Who was that superintendent at the time?
That was Dick Benjamin, Dr. Richard Benjamin. And he came from Nashville, Tennessee. Not that we knew each other at all during those times, but he came from Nashville, became the new superintendent back in 1997, pretty close to when SPLOST was beginning to be talked a great deal about the first time. And it was determined that he needed a deputy superintendent for a school district this size, and I ran pretty much the business functions for him. We worked together very closely, and I admire him a great deal. We worked pretty closely for 3 years, and then he moved on, and I was the interim superintendent for a year, until Joe Redden came in as our next superintendent, and I went back to my deputy role and worked for him, and he was a great superintendent too. And then after SPLOST 2 passed in September of '03, I said this is a great time for me to retire. And so I retired October 31st of 2003.
Tell me what you've been doing since that. And I'll preface this by, what did you learn through your career that has allowed you to be successful in consulting?
Well, one of the things that I realized very quickly when I came here, there were so many outstanding individuals that I could learn from. Whether it was the business community, whether it was the community as a whole, so many good parents that cared about their kids, so many educators that were really good educators and had all the right things in place. They cared about kids. You could trust them, and all of those type of things that made great people. And so I learned a lot from just being a good listener and observer. I was given multiple opportunities here too by doing the various jobs that I shared with you earlier. but also was given opportunities to go to leadership places that the district would send you to. I spent 2 different summers at Harvard in the Principal's Leadership Institute and the Superintendent's Leadership Institute. And the only way I could have done that was for the school district to have paid my way. So I learned a great deal by just simply being in a good place and learned sometimes the hard way. So I'm backing up just a little bit, but my first year as principal at Daniel Middle School,
Stop it. Yeah, stop.
So I learned a great deal, some of it the hard way, some of it great, some of it just learning experiences. The first year I was principal at Daniel Middle School in 1985, I get a call from the fire department, 2 o'clock in the morning. They said, your school's on fire. I said, I'll be right there. Hung up. Within 30 seconds, they called back and they said, you need to know, your school's on fire. I said, I'm coming as fast as I can. So I got there and the school was in total full smoke. Not a lot burned, but total full smoke. And we spent the remaining few hours before school was to start to try to put back together what we had. And we had school that day. And there again, I learned good people who were willing to stand beside you. As a first-year principal, when your school had some vandalism and burns, so that was a learning experience for me. But it also taught me a great deal about how to take care of your faculty, take care of students, and go ahead with the instructional process that was expected here in the school district. So it was a good learning experience.
Talk a little bit about what you're doing right now, because I'm sure as a consultant, you see other school systems that were obviously very different than Cobb. So in a minute when we'll talk to you about what you think is this system is, what's responsible for this system being as good as it is. You can compare that to other places you've been. So if we use this footage, it's helpful to qualify your words, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So tell me about your company and the ability to go look at a lot of schools and get best practices.
Well, when I retired in October 31st, 2003, my goal was to start a consulting business, start a second career pretty much. And I'd been working toward that for about 8 months, and actually Fulton County called me and asked if I would be their interim superintendent. And I agreed to do that for 4 to 6 months. Stayed a little longer than that, stayed right at 4 years. And it was a great experience, but you're right, 2 great school districts, but operated very differently. And they still operate very differently today. And another learning opportunity for me, because I operated that district maybe differently than I did in my day in Cobb. So then when I went full scale to consulting across the state, and we've been in Alabama and Florida and a couple other states too, you go all across the state and you see multiple school districts that do things very differently than Cobb. And I had to learn that as different as they may be, it is the way they prefer to do it. And so I grew to appreciate them for their beliefs in the education process of young people in their community. Maybe wasn't quite to the highest of standards as Cobb, but they were happy and felt really good about what they were doing. So I grew to appreciate them, and they learned to trust my company and me and the people who worked for me, and we were able to come in and not tell them how to do it, but help them improve. So it's a good learning experience, but the foundation that helped me along the way was all of the experiences I had in Cobb County. I was given so many opportunities that felt very prepared to go and share those across the state.
It's without question that the school system built Cobb County. No question about that. I'll use myself as an example, and I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for the school system. I moved from Birmingham, Alabama. My job's downtown Atlanta. I had 6 months to look around the region. I had 2 small kids. Education was the #1 reason our number one search thing for me. It was either going to be North Fulton or here, and the tax rate difference accomplished. But I started out with education my number one priority. I had a first grader and a kindergartner. Carol Kell was my oldest child's grammar school teacher. So if you look at the history of Cobb, the schools built it. People want to come where there's good schools. So talk about what happened that made this school system so good. It didn't happen just by chance. There were specific things that were done along the way to produce one of the best school systems in the nation. And yes, it does different than other places, but there's no question, scores and other things, reputation, we got it going real well here. So talk about how that happened over time.
Well, in my early days in Cobb, I was so impressed with leadership in general, from the 70s through the 80s and into the early part of the 90s. There were just not just superintendents, but administratively across the board, there was stability, there was caring, and of course I was a young person at the time, but you didn't question those folks. You knew they had everything in order. They knew where they were going. One of the things that as a first year teacher I was so impressed with, as I told you a few minutes ago, I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, so I'm teaching school at Floyd Middle School, and representatives from the Nashville School District came to see how we were teaching school. I just remember back in the 70s and 80s, so many other school districts across the South would come to see what we were doing. We were innovative, we were aggressive. We started middle schools instead of junior high schools. We were one of the first to do that. Others came to see how we accomplished that. I remember when we put foreign languages in middle schools, because during my tenure at Lassiter, when students would graduate, it was always fulfilling to me and rewarding for me for them to come back and let me talk to them about how they experienced their first year in college. And I had a young lady come back, and she had gone to an Ivy League school. And I asked her, I said, well, did we prepare you? And how did you do? And she says, I was totally 100% prepared except for one area. I said, well, what is that? And she said, foreign language. She said, we took 4 years of foreign language here at Lassiter. That was good, but when I went to compete with my fellow students, especially in the Northeast, most of them had had anywhere from 6 to 8 years of foreign language. That was surprising to me and disappointing to me, but sure enough, the administration of the school district, not because of that conversation, but was in the move to bring middle school foreign languages, so students, while they were in school here, got more than 4 years of instruction in foreign language, so they would be better prepared when they went collegiately. So I just thought we were always trying to be on the cutting edge, that we weren't afraid to move in a particular direction. And I just saw the leadership here, especially in the 70s and 80s and into the early 90s, is very strong.
Who do you view? I've got this book that I've read before. John Cheerholtz signed it, and he outlined some points about, and you would agree with these too, about what it took to build a great organization. What he did with Braves, create a new vision, establish organizational goals, develop a roadmap or game plan for success, inspire your team, and then the biggest one, provide the leadership. Who are the great leaders as far back as you can remember? You don't have success long term without good leadership.
Sure.
You've provided, I know that. Who are some of the other people that you say, if it wasn't for Ernest Barrett, we wouldn't be here? Who was that in the school world? Who were your leaders?
Back in the early days of my tenure, Mr. Keenum, Kermit Keenum, his leadership team involved Jerry Ingram, who most educators in my time would tell you was just a tremendous administrator, was pulled back after retirement 2 different times to be an interim superintendent for us in transition to help us get back on track when we stumbled a little bit. So I would tell you Jerry Ingram, Tom Mathis was historic. Everybody loved him. And the thing about those guys and ladies that I haven't mentioned yet, whatever they told you, you just automatically did, because you respected them so much and you knew they were taking you down the right path. You were never a question of whether we were ethically doing something correct. We just knew that if they told us that it was the right thing and that our job was to make that be completed in the correct way. The school district certainly had growing pains because we grew so fast, because people did move here for education. They moved to Cobb County for a lot of reasons. The communities were safe, fire, police. You can look all over, Chamber of Commerce, everywhere you went, you saw strong leadership. So people did move to these schools. I remember at Lassiter, we grew 400 students in 1 year. I remember at open house, ladies going down the hallway, and she's just fussing because she said, I wouldn't have moved here if I'd known it was going to be this crowded. And I didn't say it to her, but what I wanted to say was, if you hadn't moved here, it wouldn't be this crowded. But we managed fine. During the days before SPLOST, and bond issues were done almost every other year, small bond issues, we experienced so much growth that schools went on double sessions. Walton, basically the year it opened, began on double sessions until Lassiter was built, and Lassiter was on extended day until Pope was built, and so many places like that. McEachern had better than 3,300 students, and people moved to those communities for the schools, and we knew that, and it was a responsibility that we had to give them a great education. It was kind of nice, the fact that they wanted to come here.
In things that I read about, and I did this as Chamber CEO, this community supported education. In some places they don't.
Correct.
They're just school buildings. Talk about the role of the community in Cobb County in helping the school systems as they grew to be high quality also.
Well, I think what was created here was an atmosphere of, we're in this together. So while we're going to educate your kids, we want you to be involved in our school. So PTAs, booster clubs, things like that were very important to us. During my principal days, on Thursday night, a group of dads would come in about 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock at night. They would spend the entire night lining off the football field for the Friday night football game.
Okay.
We are in a school. And they would spend the entire night lining off the football field so our team would have a good environment to play in. And so you had so much parent involvement, parents willing to do whatever they needed to do to help. I know that when I've talked about into the early 90s, the school district started struggling in the mid-90s. We had some leadership issues, we had some board issues, and we were trying to correct that and trying to improve, but it was a difficult time for us. And I think we did that. Jerry Ingram, I've mentioned, he came back for a second time to be the interim superintendent to make sure that we got back on track as quickly as we should have. But the 1997 SPLOST was a failure, and it was the first time Cobb had ever failed at anything. And we had to assess what we had done incorrectly and how we were going to improve. And we called on the chamber, we called on Johnny Isaacson, Bob Prilliman, and all the leaders in our county and said, look, we need help. And in 1998, it passed. We told everyone that if you allow us to do this SPLOST, we will do exactly as we have put in print that we will do. And in 2003, again, the chamber, Bob Prilliman, Janie Maddox, and all of those folks who cared about the school system came to our aid again, and this time it passed 78, almost 79%, because we had done what we said we were going to do. So we regained that trust. We regained the faith in our community, but we stumbled a little bit. I guess over a long period of time that happens, and we learned from our mistakes and corrected it.
the first year it passed, Kessel Stelling and I were the chairs of the campaign. And that's where I think I first got to know you.
Yes.
And you're right, the community came together. And because people trusted, thanks to Otis, people trusted what you did with the money, and we won't get back to Otis in a minute, trusted what you did with the money, it continued to pass. So the assets grew with the population because of SPLOST. Most people that watch this are not even know what SPLOST is.
Correct.
So would you just talk a little bit about it, how it's done, and the role it plays in our school system? Because I think people, when they see history, they see Cobb's got these great buildings. They got rich people. Yeah, they have some wealth, but they also have a mechanism that works. We support bond issues, and the community will help pass the SPLOST. Why, we've even got partners in it, which is unusual. So
Yeah, it's really good. And you mentioned it, you and Kessel Stelling were the co-chairs of the 1998 SPLOST. And it wasn't too long ago, just recently, that I ran into Kessel, and that's what he wants to talk about. He's still fired up about it because it was a challenge. We had to work really hard to make sure the community understood what SPLOST was. What acronym is that? You know, what is that? Because for years, the only way you could build schools in this state was through a bond issue. And conservatively, we always did $30 to $40 million bonds. They always passed. It was always within our ability to do that work. But it didn't take care of all the needs as we were growing so quickly. Back in the 1998, 2003, during those 5 or 6 years, we had over 600 portable classrooms, and we were growing 3,000 students a year. So it took a lot of energy to make sure that we did it correctly. So SPLOST in 1997 became state law, and it was determined that school districts could offer a 1% sales tax for capital programs to build schools, to add on to existing schools, or to modify or renovate existing schools. It was a program that a lot of people didn't understand. I remember being at a Lewis Elementary School PTA meeting, talking about SPLOST and excited, and the gentleman corners me after it's over, and he said, "You know, we need to do a bond." And he was for the schools. He was a great guy, but he didn't comprehend SPLOST, as a lot of people didn't back in those days.
what does SPLOST stand for?
Yeah, Special Purpose Local Option Sales Tax. And since it was new in 1997, people really didn't comprehend that. They did comprehend bonds, and bonds had some good things, but you had to pay it back over a period of time with interest. And SPLOST was a local option sales tax. It was a pay-as-you-go. There wasn't any borrowing of money, and it was a great program, and we tried to make good use of that opportunity and show the community that we knew how to do it and we could do it and do it correctly. SPLOST 1 built 12 new schools. SPLOST 2 built 9 new schools. Trying to accommodate the growth that was occurring during the 90s and the early 2000s for a school district that technically was really growing about 3,000 students a year. So while we tried to reduce our dependency on portable classrooms, we were growing so quickly, it really took us 10 years, 2 SPLOST, to take care of that. So,
Well, y'all also were allowed to use those dollars for technology, and everybody knows how technology has changed. Just keep talking. Yeah, everybody knows how technology has changed. So as you're talking about SPLOST some more, bring that issue up, because had you not had SPLOST dollars, buying computers and computer systems may not have kept up with the growth in technology in our country.
and that's correct. I think SPLOST was initially designed as a true bricks and sticks law. But as it was better defined, technology was coming into the schools and coming in quickly, and that was an opportunity to spend good money on some technology in the classrooms. And we did that. And in today's world with Chris Ragsdale, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but in today's world with Chris Ragsdale as superintendent, who has a technology background, the school district is really moving forward in good fashion with that. We had to learn back in the 1990s and the 2000s on what technology we should have. and technology was changing so quickly. By the time you purchased it and put it into the classroom, it was outdated if you weren't careful. So we had to figure out just how much we could do and how quickly we could put it in teachers' and students' hands, and to ensure that if we put it in their hands, they would have the training to use it and that they would use it, instead of walk down the hall and find the computer lab locked. And we didn't want that. So technology has played a key part in the education of young people in this school district.
When when I was out and Kessel was out and you were part of that too, doing debates, what was the guy from Lockheed that used to beat us up all the time?
Well, there were two or three, Paul Ploner and David Chastain.
David Chastain,
Yeah.
who's obviously now in schools. One of the talking points, well, actually two talking points I'd like for you to throw out, because I think it has a lot to do with where we are today. One was in SPLOST, almost 40% of those dollars are from people coming in here and shopping. That's another financial reason to do it. And the business community and the school system collaborated on that. We went out and talked. The other thing that helped our schools, I believe, is the idea of better safety. And today we know what that means. But you got rid of portable classrooms to move people inside one building. So 40% issue and safety issue were really important as we went through this hyper-growth period in Cobb and in schools.
Yeah, the 40% issue is something that Cobb's very proud of because we're very fortunate. So the belief is that 40% of those pennies actually come from someone who doesn't live in our county, but they come through or come here for a reason, like Six Flags or Whitewater, or they're traveling down 75 or 575 or 20 or 285. So we have interstates all through our county.
Get back hard.
And so there's a real belief that from a financial end, we're getting other folks to help pay for our schools. And it's fortunate that we have businesses that people come to, good shopping, and all of those type of things. And so it's just a great program to have when you think that others are helping you pay for the benefit of schools.
How about the safety aspect?
Well, the safety aspect is something that probably doesn't get the credit in this county, in this school district, that it should, because we've always been very focused on safety. We've had campus police officers in our high schools ever since I can remember. We filter that down into middle schools and elementary schools, sharing police officers and or campus officers. So we've always had that, and if you're going to have that, those folks have to have the means to support that. So the communication means through the towers and whatnot, where we could communicate with anyone and everyone that we needed to, and just making sure that there was a presence on campus where people knew that you had a safe environment. And again, recently, in Mr. Ragsdale's tenure as superintendent, they've had a great focus on safety, as we always have. His tenure now, I would say, is a little more focused because of the requirements today compared to a few years ago. But it allowed us to do that. And that's the benefit, I think, of SPLOST programs. It allowed us to do so many things that we just simply weren't able to do otherwise.
9 years ago, when I took over the chamber and started working on the new economic development program, which became Competitive Edge, I found out, to my surprise actually, the number one reason companies locate in a geographic area is safe schools and workforce development in general. But safe schools for the people they move here is really, really, really important, and it always has been. So just say a few words about you and the school system understanding great safe schools is what's necessary to bring jobs.
Well, one of the things that you'll find in Cobb County, and you always have, is that you would see firsthand safe schools, because there's always been a lot of community involvement. On Friday night football games, there are huge crowds there, and it's a safe place to drop off your child. We didn't always like, as school administrators, that you dropped your child off and picked them up after the game, but it was a safe place to do. And one of the things that I really enjoyed in my tenure at Lassiter, people would come to the games, didn't have children in the schools. They just happened to find that as their thing to do on Friday night. So I think people saw all along that it was a safe place to be. You as a community member with children in schools, and that schools were safe. And it was kind of, open campus may not be the right term, but you could see it firsthand. You could see firsthand that schools were safe and that there was emphasis being placed on that. And so I think you could just simply see it. So you as a parent who wanted to make sure that your children were going to safe schools, you could learn more about it, you could comprehend and learn what was really going on, but you could see it firsthand.
Just say a few words about the business focus of the school systems, understanding that education was one of, if not the most important variable in a decision to bring jobs to Cobb County. And that's not just recent, that goes back
A long time. Yeah, sure does. A long time. Before me even, I think the school district gained the reputation that there was a good education here for families, there was a good place to live, and workforce development came right along with that. So it was a partnership. And I always saw county government, workforce development, the chamber, I always saw it as a partnership. And had great relationships. In my deputy days and superintendent days here, we had great relationships with county government. We worked with those guys and ladies like they worked with us, and it was a partnership and felt good about it. Same thing with the chamber and any other organization that was a part of our county. There was a sense of we should all be in this together, we should all work together, and it was evident all the time. So I don't know that I ever had a run-in of any kind with any agency. It was all, okay, how can we help you, what can we do? And it was rewarding.
Is that noise? Okay. There are 6 cities in Cobb County. Sure that's what that would pick up. We'll be fine. We'll be fine, okay. Teachers talk loud, don't they?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
Even louder.
Yeah.
Where was I?
6 cities.
Yeah, there's 6 cities, and we're interviewing mayors too.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about partnership with the county. I think that partnership is just as strong with our 6 cities.
I'll give you a real quick example. We, in one of the SPLOST, it was time to replace Ackworth Elementary School, Austell Elementary School, Kennesaw Elementary School, that were all built 1915. They were old, and it was time to replace them. And we came up with the idea of being able to put to tear down the old school, put a new school in its place. But back in 1915, a school would be put on 4 or 5 acres, so we didn't have a lot of acreage. So we started creating multiple schools, and we did K2 schools. And so I'm meeting with Tommy Allagood, who's the mayor of Ackworth, and telling him what we're going to do. And he looks at me and he said, I just want one thing. Not having a clue what he was about to say, but he said, I just want one thing. He said, I want to be first. And we saw to it that Ackworth got built first, as well as Kennesaw and Austell coming in right behind. But it was that great support. He liked the idea, he liked the concept. It was a little kid's school, it was on a small campus, so we kept the original campus. We even kept the old gymnasium and some of those kind of things, but we certainly couldn't put the size of elementary school that we do today on that small footprint. But he says, I just want to be first. And I could share stories of all the, Max Bacon, a classic, and he and I got along very well during my earlier days and his days, and he was a great supporter of the school district and believed very strongly in what we were doing, and you knew you were going to get his support. You better be right, and you better be focused and have your ducks in a row, but you knew you could count on his support.
I'm going to switch tapes.